Good morning, everybody. My name is Jake Kirsch. I work with the Housing Development Center. I use he, him pronouns. I'm going to do a quick intro because I need to apologize to three of my colleagues here who you see six of us up here, and in the program there were only three. So in addition to myself and Monica and Chris who are in the program, we have Hannah Schmaltz from Home Forward and Devin Ellen from Clackamas County and Brandon Kirchner from Central Cultural. And we are here today to talk to you about the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program. That's RLRA, but you're going to probably hear at least a few of us say ARLA. So if you're not familiar with it, we say ARLA because saying RLRA is kind of hard, but we are very aware that RLRA does not spell ARLA. Can I quickly ask for a show of hands after you stretch? For anybody, do people know about ARLA already? Okay. Do people in the room work with ARLA vouchers already? Awesome. So we have some expertise in the room and folks that are here to hopefully have ARLA vouchers that you work with in the near future. So we don't have a lot of time. This will be a pretty high level overview of the program. So I hope if you have questions at the end, and if there's not enough time for everybody's questions, that you track one of us down and ask more. So I'm going to pass it off to Hannah. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hannah Schmaltz. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at Home Forward with the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program and Shelter Plus Care. And I'm going to give just a brief overview, which it sounds like a lot of you are already familiar with ARLA, but I'll just talk a little about the program in a big picture sense, and then a little bit about the history of it. So the ARLA program is part of the Supportive Housing Services programming that came to be from the Metro ballot measure in 2020, the Supportive Housing Services measure. It is a locally funded voucher program versus what a lot of people were used to prior, which was federally funded voucher programs like Housing Choice or Section 8. It exists as both tenant-based subsidies, where folks take the voucher out into the open market and find apartments, and also as project-based subsidies, where folks can the assistance would be tied to a unit in a building, and this services would be in that building. So the model overall is the permanent supportive housing model, so housing assistance tied with supportive services. And it exists in all three counties, excuse me, where housing authorities are managing the subsidy, the rent assistance subsidy side of the work, and then community-based organizations are doing the support services. And that can look like many things: help with housing search, placement, housing retention. In each county, so we have folks from all three counties. The program is operating independently, but we also follow regional guidelines that make the program consistent throughout the whole Tri-County area. Let's see. I think I covered that. So let's go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of history about the program. Back in 2018, there was a local pilot project led by Bobby Weinstock at Northwest Pilot Project. Some of you probably knew Bobby, where they were trying to address, specifically focusing on rent burden seniors, like rising rent prices compared to incomes, as well as the fact that the federal voucher program only serves 25% of households that are actually eligible. And so that initial pilot was focused on those rent burden seniors and a smaller number of chronically homeless households that were served by Join. And there was a lot of work to use the experience of, from housing authorities that had administered voucher programs, but then to look at ways to make that more flexible, to make the eligibility easier, to make the access to the program and just all of the elements of it easier for participants and for agencies as well, and to lower barriers so more households could be served. And so as the program, again, it was a partnership with Housing Authority, with the Joint Office, Joint Northwest Pilot Project, all working together in that pilot. And what came out of it was positive review from participants and from organizations that the kind of simplified process was much better than the federal program. And then when the SHS measure passed, Metro used that initial work as a starting point to develop the local program. And so that's kind of how we came to be and how the policies that we have came to be. In the Metro measure, there's a mandate to spend 75% of the funding on folks who have the highest barriers to housing. So we're serving folks who are very low income, 30% or below, who identify as having a disability and who have experienced chronic instability with their housing. And so far in Multnomah County, that's exclusively who we've served until just a few weeks ago, actually. But there is also room to serve some other households as well. 25% of the funding can go to folks who don't meet that strict criteria. And also in the Metro mandate and what we're following is leading with racial equity and making sure that we are serving communities of color that have been disproportionately impacted by the housing crisis. So in Multnomah County, we have programs like for culturally specific communities, and agencies are leading those projects. We have projects for families, projects for single folks, and partnerships with domestic violence survivors. So there's a lot of different projects going on. And we also work with coordinated access to that's the way that folks kind of come into the program. So that is a little bit of big picture and history about the program. And I'm going to pass to Monica.
Thank you. Thank you. Next slide, please. So my name is Monica. I'm the landlord liaison for Washington County. And so I'm going to be talking about how the RLRA voucher compares to other vouchers, kind of the similar things that the things that they have in common and what is different about RLRA. So as you all may know, the RLRA program is administered locally by each housing authority. So in Clackamas, it's the Clackamas Housing Authority. In Multnomah County, it's Home Forward. And in Washington County, it's the Housing Authority of Washington County who administers the RLRA vouchers. It's administered pretty similarly to the HUD-funded Housing Choice Voucher, which is also known as the Section 8 voucher, and also the HUD VASH voucher, which is a it's a HUD Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing voucher that the housing authorities work with the VA. They refer participants over and they do the eligibility for the voucher. The main difference with the RLRA voucher is that it's locally funded versus federally funded. So it does provide a little bit more flexibility that the federally funded vouchers don't. Next slide, please. So for the RLRA voucher, as you work with participants or tenants, they have an RLRA award certificate, which is different than the Housing Choice Voucher and the HUD VASH program, because they are awarded a HUD official looking document that is the voucher with lots of legal language. And so the RLRA voucher is much more simplified. It's a certificate, so it may not look like the typical voucher that everybody's used to seeing, which is one of the differences between the vouchers. And the RLRA voucher can also be used only within the metro area. So that could even exclude a little pieces of area that are within each county that are not within the metro boundary. So that is where the RLRA voucher can be used versus the HUD-VASH voucher and the housing choice voucher that, depending on the housing authority's policies, could be used there immediately or any other place in the country, basically. The RLRA vouchers also come with an assigned case manager to each voucher holder. So that is a main difference between that and the housing choice voucher program. It is slightly similar to the HUD-VASH program, where they also have an assigned case manager, but the case managers for the HUD-VASH program are social workers that can provide like mental health services and expanded services that the RLRA voucher case managers wouldn't necessarily be able to provide, but they are able to provide the services for each household, like connecting them to other resources, working towards self-sufficiency, addressing any other instability issues that the household may have. And so with the RLRA program, it has additional incentives and resources that the other vouchers don't have. So they have landlord incentives, flex funds that case managers can tap into. So there's a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to tapping into funds to support households for retention, growth, anything that really may come up for a household. The case managers are really able to step in and provide those supports. And the documentation requirements for the RLRA program are much more flexible than the HUD programs. And again, just because it's locally funded, there's different rules that we can sort of write in that we don't really have to stick to the federal guidelines. There may be some instances that some policies may defer back to like the federal policies, but for the most part, there's a lot more flexibility within the RLRA program. And the RLRA program also has an agreement versus a HAP contract, which is the Housing Assistance Payment Contract. So the HAP contract, if you've never read it, is a nice 15, 16-page document with tiny fine print that talks about all of the things tenants should and shouldn't do and landlords should and shouldn't do. And the RLRA agreement is much more comprehensive, like less legal talk that everybody can really understand, and really just outlines the purpose of the program. And with the RLRA program, the tenant's rent portion is limited to 28.5% of their income. So some of it may cross over depending on the housing authorities, because Home Forward is moving to work, so they kind of have a similar structure. Clackamas, don't think you do, right? Go up to 40. Yeah. So for Clackamas, traditional housing choice voucher, VASH vouchers, they have a different scale of the increase that the tenants can pay with their portion. But with the RLRA program, it's 28.5 across the board for all voucher holders. And there's also more flexible inspection requirements. So unlike the voucher program and the HUD-VASH program, the inspection requirements can be a little bit more flexible, a little more ability to work with landlords. Landlords can tap into different resources that we're able to provide to get the inspection items repaired and get people moved in. So I've touched a little bit on some of the things that they have in common, all three of the voucher types. The main one will also be the request for tenancy approval. That's the form that the landlords fill out that tells the housing authority everything about the unit, how much the rent is, how much the contract rent is, the deposit is, the utility responsibility, address. It really tells them everything that they need to know about the unit. So that's one thing that is still very, very much the same for all three. And as I mentioned, the housing authorities each administer the vouchers. So they are still the administrators of this voucher, make the payments to the landlords, set up all of the things that need to be done in order for us to be able to make those payments and provide people with assistance. Next slide, please. So for the ARLA landlord incentives, the incentives that we have and we're able to provide to landlords are an incentive payment, which is basically a payment to a landlord for renting to one of our participants. So it does look slightly different between the 3 counties, but that is still something that is there for everybody. And then if you want to know specifically like how it works in each county, feel free to come up afterwards and ask us and we can give you all the details. But that is something that is available for everybody. We also have the repair reimbursement. And so this is something that is a big plus for landlords because if their inspection failed, they're able, after they make the repairs and the tenant moves in, signs the lease, the housing authority starts paying, they can request to have part of that cost reimbursed to them as long as it's over $500 and up to $1,000. And again, it looks slightly different in each of the counties, but that is something that is still open for landlords. And I won't go too much into the risk mitigation program because Jake is going to tell you all about it later, but it does cover costs related to unit repair that's really beyond normal wear and tear. So it's really excessive damage, legal action, and unlimited collected rents. And so that's something that we're able to kind of deliver to the landlords as a package in conjunction with the case management and the rental assistance to really incentivize them to participate and be our landlords, and if they have openings to contact us and let us know, and so we can provide that information to our case managers and they can it's less of a barrier for the tenants to be able to find a unit, because if the landlords know about all of this and they know about the things that they can tap into and the supports that we give, and also I think one of the major things is, I always keep forgetting to putting it in here, but I think one of the major things also is having a landlord liaison and having someone that the landlords can contact and have their questions answered. And, it doesn't just go into the empty space, like somebody is answering, and we are connecting them with case managers or connecting them with the housing authority, or, if we don't know where to find it, we have the ability to connect with people and be able to get the answer for the landlords and provide that additional support. All right, so that is the end of mine. So I will pass it on to Devin. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Devin Ellen. I'm the Housing Development Director with the Housing Authority of Clackamas County, and I'm here today to talk about just compare the project-based ARLA with project-based HUD, kind of from the developer's perspective. So on top of all the things that Monica talked about, I'm just going to compare the two. So project-based ARLA, there's no subsidy layering review process, which if you've gone through that on the HUD side, it can be a bit tedious and fraught with uncertainty around scheduling. There's no environmental review required if you project-base your ARLA, whereas the project-based Section 8 has a NEPA environmental review requirement. Under the project-based Section 8 HUD vouchers, if you have 8 or more, or 9, if you have 8 vouchers at a property, Davis-Bacon wage rates are triggered, and that's not the case with ARLA vouchers. The terms of the contracts are slightly different. So ARLA can be at least 1 year up to 20 years, but the funding beyond June 2032 must be contingent upon availability of rental assistance. So that's kind of when the measure funds, as they are now approved, would run out. Whereas, the HUD Section 8 contracts are generally, for the most part, 20 years, and there's renewal options. The payment standards or rent reimbursement rates, as they call it under the ARLA program, are, cap rates at 80% AMI, so between 60 and 80%. depending on the project and each county's criteria. Whereas the HUD vouchers are set at fair market rents. So they change every year, and there's a little bit of uncertainty there. And rent adjustments every year, the ARLA vouchers, increase between 2% and 3%, whereas the landlord needs to request a rent adjustment to the housing authority, and they'll adjust that based on the FMR that HUD releases that year. And then vacancy payments. So, they're at the discretion of each county, but they can be made for up to 2 months. And then in the case of the Section 8, also at the discretion of the housing authority, and can be made, up to 2 months. But that is not typical. And I think those are some of the main differences. Monica touched on the inspections. There's a little bit of flexibility there for regulated units. So if you're already under a LIHTC program or something like that, a tax credit program, the ARLA team will rely on their inspections rather than going through the housing quality standards reviews that HUD requires. So I will pass it on to Chris.
Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Pence. I'm the landlord liaison for Clackamas County. So I work with Devin. And I'm going to talk today about the impact that we've had so far, and mostly using data. So the other 2 counties were gracious enough to provide me the data at the end of the second programmatic year, which ended June 30th. And so I compiled the data from the 3 counties to try to show the impact that we're having regionally with ARLA. For you number of folks, I'm hoping this will help you grasp all the people that we're helping. So, as of June 30th, 1,726 households were currently receiving long-term rent assistance, supportive services, with case management with this ARLA funding. After only 2 years, that's a really stunning amount of people that we've already been able to reach. And so, the number of individuals, almost 3,000, reflecting we do have a lot of families in the program. And we're still growing really quickly. At that time, we had almost 300 households that had already been issued vouchers and were out searching for units on the private market. We're continuing to issue vouchers every month, and our rate of growth is only accelerating as we're able to hire more staff. Our case management partners are able to hire more staff, increase their capacity. So we're actually issuing more vouchers each month as we continue. Our goal regionally is to serve 5,000 households. So have 5,000 households in our program, getting rent assistance payments every month, getting supportive services from community-based organizations. And so far, just with the ARLA vouchers, that part of supportive housing services funding, as of June 30th, we were more than a third of the way there to our goal. And we still have funding and capacity to expand, and we are expanding quickly, as I mentioned. Next slide, please. The demographics, I'm going to touch a little bit about the people that we're serving. So who is in our program? I think it's a core piece of the supportive housing services policy and guidance that we really want to be equity first, especially when it comes to the history of racial discrimination in housing, and the overrepresentation of people of color in our communities experiencing homelessness, particularly unsheltered homelessness. And so we're really making strides in, serving the people that need it. And these numbers are overrepresenting people of color relative to our population in the area, because those people of color are more likely to experience homelessness and more likely to be eligible for our programs. So 48% of our participants are Black, Brown, or Indigenous. 52% are non-Hispanic white. if you're familiar with the Portland area, you know that it's a pretty white city. And so this is, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we are, compared to the population overall, we are, overrepresenting the people of color in our program. So, and then as far as age, it really runs the gambit. I mean, we have 25% roughly that are under 18, which are children of, other household members. We have people, over a quarter that are above 55. So we really have households of all shapes and sizes, and a lot of children in our program. Next slide, please. As far as unit sizes, if there are any landlords or property owners in the room, most of our folks end up renting studio and 1-bedroom units because most of the people we serve are single family households. Again, that reflects the population that's experiencing unsheltered homelessness, chronic homelessness. A lot of them are single individuals. But we do have a lot of folks renting 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units, 4-bedroom units, 5, 6. I could have kept going here. We have some single family homes because we have families of 8 or more people. And I also want to note here, we, unlike some other voucher programs which are very strict on how they define family, and they kind of tell the participants that person isn't part of your family because they aren't your mother or son or whatever it is. We're able to be more flexible, like Monica was mentioning, with a lot of policies. One is that we are able to kind of listen to our participants, like who they consider to be in their family, and who they want to live with. So that's another great piece of the program that I really like. And also some folks in single family household or single member households, because of our higher payment standards, are able to rent 2-bedroom units, even though they have a 1-bedroom voucher. It's often hard to find 1-bedroom units. They're really desirable and there's not a huge supply. So another benefit and flexibility there. Next slide, please. Briefly, just giving you a sense of how much rent assistance we're paying on average. It's $1,400 per household per month. Most of our participants have very low income. We have a lot of folks with no income. On average, our participants pay only $118 per month towards rent. That said, we do have families with, $30,000, $40,000 or more in annual income. So they are paying more. They pay 28.5% of their gross income towards rent and utilities. But those with very low or no incomes, we also send checks each month to help them pay for a portion of their utilities, because we know that just the rent isn't the only expense, and we want to make sure that they have help with the utilities as well. And then their case managers are able to have flex funds to help with other things, food, and help them sign up for SNAP or other benefits to really make sure that all their needs are being met. So as of June 30th, we'd already spent $18 million in rent and utility assistance. So that is a huge sum of funding that is directly benefiting these people who are generally coming out of homelessness or have recently experienced homelessness, making it possible for them to live, and also making it possible for landlords to serve the people in their communities that they normally can't rent to because they don't qualify for their properties. So it's really a huge impact that we're having. Next slide, please. And despite the really high needs and barriers of a lot of the folks that we serve, we have a very strong success rate. So how do we measure success? If someone moves into housing and is still in our program and still housed 12 months later, we're considering that a successful case. 92% so far of our households, once they move in, meet that metric of success, and we're really proud of that figure, and we hope that we can keep that and maybe even get it higher. But I think it's important to dispel some stereotypes about people experiencing homelessness. They're risky to rent to, they're going to cause problems. Most folks, as you can see, are successful and remain housed, and especially with the support of rent assistance and case management, are able to be very successful. And I know we're gonna speak to the case management next, so I'm not gonna talk too much about that, but it is really critical. And I wanted to briefly touch on to dispelling those stereotypes and myths about people with vouchers, HUD has published a fact sheet about these myths, and really on most measurable ways, there's not research showing that people with vouchers, that they're specifically looking at the housing choice voucher program, but I think it's, you can compare. People with those vouchers are not more likely to cause damage, not more likely to be evicted. On average, they stay in housing for 8 years. So despite the fact that there are people that have those stereotypes, especially landlords, we see certain landlords that, do worry about people with vouchers and what kind of tenants they're going to make, but it really isn't borne out in the data. So that's all I have, and I'm going to pass it over to Brandon. Next slide, please.
Hello, my name is Brandon Kirchner, and I am a HCMS and our rapid rehousing supervisor with Centro Cultural. We are in a Cornelius. I don't know if a lot of people know where Cornelius is. It's between Forest Grove and Hillsborough. So to tell you a little about Centro Cultural, we've been here for the past 50 years. We are the oldest culturally specific Latino organization in Oregon. We were founded by migrant families who came out here and basically said, we're working here, so we might as well start creating a home and family. And white people were like, no. And they were like, bet. So they're still here. They're part of Centro Cultural still, and they're thriving. So I just want to tell you a little more about some of the services we offer. We support Washington County by offering services for the Latin Hispanic community, but we do serve all. We offer all of our services in Spanish, so that's like a huge barrier gone, because a lot of people can't access services because they have that huge language barrier. Next slide, please. Before I go into housing, actually, I wanted to go into a couple of the services that Centro has, because we have more than just housing. We offer economic development. So we have workforce, helping get connected to jobs, living wages, helping advance their careers, self-development with business. We also have health and wellness. We have Edad de Oro, which is a seniors club. We found that a lot of our seniors were very isolated. So we would have, they meet a couple times a week. They have events, food. We have Centro Cocina de Oro, which is for a senior nutrition program. A lot of them weren't getting the nutrition that they needed. So we feed them, come every day. Then we also have Ventanilla de Salud, which is connected with the Mexican consulate, and they offer free preventative services. And then we have La Clinica, which is every 2 weeks, which does OHP assistance, monkeypox vaccines, all that good stuff. We have youth development, which we have, volunteering, mentoring, assistance with school. We have a robotics Lego program, which is awesome. We do STEAM, and then we have arts and culture. We have a residency program where they have people who likely wouldn't have, been exposed, had any publicity or anything, and they get to stay there for like a couple months, and they put on shows, and it's great. If you want to go see any of that stuff, I highly recommend. You can visit our website, centrocultural.org. All right. And then, so now I'm going to talk about our housing programs. So we do have 4, talked about HCMS and rapid rehousing earlier, but we also have our bridge shelter, Casa Amparo. We're going through renovation right now, but it's a great facility. We have a lot of our clients that don't want to end up leaving because it's such a sense of community and family. We try to have events. We bring out education, recycling, all that good stuff, everything that they need to learn to be a tenant, because a lot of our clients haven't had that experience. This is the first time that they're going to be in housing. So they need those skills. So we help them build those skills. Also, we have non-congregate. It used to be winter shelter, but now they're like, we need that all year. So that keeps a lot of people off the street as well. And so a little bit about what we do is we provide in housing is case management. And what that looks like is advocating. What do case managers do? Everything. And if we don't do it, we connect them to the resources that can help them. So what we found within our community is there was the language barrier, but RLA did a lot of great things. Like you don't have to have an ID to get your RLA. We can work on that. We work with landlords that are like, you know what, you don't have a lot of documentation, we'll work with you. We'll get you in. We have one, John Silencione. He's been great. We've been able to house, I think, about 6 or 7 households just through him. And they're all undocumented. So that was really great for us. And so, yeah, yeah. So we provide case management, economic development, employment services, civic leadership, health and wellness, connection to arts and culture, youth development, and I forgot to mention our Mercado. It's connected to the Oregon Food Bank and our community partners. So a bunch of farms around the area, open Monday through Friday. Anybody could go. It has great food. They do have Trader Joe's as well. So, but yeah, so our focus is Latin Hispanic, but we serve everybody. And we do have a lot of great events. We had El Grito recently, and I highly recommend going to the website, going to the events, become part of the culture. This is how you learn and become part of it. It's a great experience. So yeah, thank you.
A great microphone pass. I'm going to attempt to walk down the stairs and pass these out, which I should have done beforehand. So hopefully I don't trip. Again, for anybody who wasn't here before, I'm Jake Kirsch with the Housing Development Center. I use he, him pronouns. The flyer that's going around right now is specifically about the risk mitigation program component of RLA. If there are not enough of these to go around, I believe there are still a few at the HDC table in the exhibit hall. We are the first table closest to the door, next to a lovely hotel pillar column. And certainly I hope to be at that table for much of the day today. So if your questions don't get answered about the RMP during this session, please stop by and ask and chat. Real quick before I get into the RMP, I want to make sure to point out that the slides for today, I'm going to be sending Kevin a PDF version, and it's going to have my notes because my slides don't have a ton of words. This one does, but the rest don't. And he's going to attach that to the YouTube version of the presentation. So if anybody wants those, the slides and the notes to go along with my portion, that's where you will find them soon. I want to have this slide in here to drive home the fact that the RMP is technically an incentive to property owners participating in RLA. And it is very much that. But we also see the RMP as fitting very well into the overall mission of RLA. And so we see this as another tool to help prevent folks from losing their housing once they get in, removing barriers to be that incentive for landlords to participate in RLA, and hopefully prevent evictions, lease violations down the line. I'll get into some of the ways we think that can happen in the next slides. Next slide, please. So I'm going to cover 5 kind of overall questions, and I'm going to try to be brief for I think I only know a few of you in this room. The ones I do know, brevity is not my strong suit, but I will try to make this quick enough that we have time for questions at the end. But I think the first big question is, what is ARLA? We've heard, or the RMP portion of ARLA. We've heard about overall ARLA. The RMP is a program to provide reimbursements to landlords for either physical damages or operational losses associated with either renting to tenants with tenant-based ARLA vouchers or having project-based ARLA at their properties. Again, it's for all 3 counties in the metro area. HDC administers it. Our role is to process the claims, to make the claims payments, doing a lot of outreach like this. I'm putting together an advisory committee, and I'm going to make a quick pitch for that. If anybody in this room might be interested in that after I get done talking, please don't hesitate to contact me. That advisory committee will be the body to review policies and procedures for the risk mitigation program and make recommendations to the counties for changes to those policies and procedures, because this is new. And we know that we've designed it up until now the best we thought we could, but we know there will always be ways to make it better. And your input will help us do that. And very specifically, we will have property owner, property management representation on that advisory committee, but we also very much need the perspective of folks working on behalf of tenants. And ultimately, we would love to have tenants that have utilized ARLA on the advisory committee as well. Right now, the process for submitting a claim is on HDC's website. It is a Excel form, but I'm working on a web form. So that's a great example of a way in which we're trying to make this better. And that advisory committee hopefully will be a great place to nudge me and nudge the team to keep making this program more accessible and easier to use. Next slide, please. So the next big question is, what might it cover? Monica already mentioned that it's on the physical damage side. We have designed this to be beyond normal wear and tear. So we do expect that, spot cleaning of carpets and touch-up painting in units at turnover definitely happens. So those wouldn't be eligible items, but a lot of things beyond that are. So some of the categories that would be covered would be excessive cleaning. So some cleaning always happens on turnovers. Debris removal if folks leave their possessions in units. Here, I do want to stress, like I mentioned before, we see this as a tool to help prevent evictions, prevent lease violations. So debris removal is a great example of a place where it actually could be used before a tenant leaves the unit. We've already had an example of someone needing to remove debris from a hoarding situation in order to even get to repairs that need to be made. So I should step back one step and say and reinforce that claims can be made while a tenant still lives in the unit. There is no requirement that a tenant has already left their unit before a claim can be filed and a claim can be paid out. So again, we've seen examples early on where tenants have a second chance and they're not burdened with that debt, and the landlord decides not to proceed with evictions because they're able to come to the RMP for reimbursements. Some other items would be extermination if there's pest infestations, and then repair and replacement to things that you don't normally have to do at turnover or during the tenancy. So, windows, doors that need to be replaced, appliances that need to be replaced because of damage done to them. I will say that we do expect that damage that's requested through the claims process be the result of the actions of a tenant with an ARLA voucher or in an ARLA unit or a guest of that household. So I like to use the example of if there's a stove fire and sprinkler system goes off and there's water damage, that would be an eligible physical damage incident. If a pipe bursts due to faulty plumbing or deferred maintenance, that is not something that the tenant caused. So that wouldn't be an eligible item. And on the lines of the stove fire, we do have the ability to do multi-unit claims. So a lot of claims will just be for the unit, the RLA unit. But in a situation in which sprinkler system goes off, that unit is damaged, pretty likely other units at the property would also be damaged. You have the ability to include up to 5 units. They don't have to be other RLA units. 5 total units that were involved in that damage incident could be included in the claims. And toward next couple slides, I'll get to what the dollar amounts are, because that's obviously important to everybody. Common area damage can be included. With common area damage, we do need something beyond the property owner saying it was that tenant that did it. So we've wrestled with this, and right now we've landed on like a witness affidavit from a third party that witnessed the damage done to common areas exteriors by somebody with a RLA voucher or living in an RLA unit. On the operational side of things, I think the big eligible item there that probably will get utilized the most is up to 90 days of tenants' rent that they are unable to pay. The RMP portion of RLA is not designed to be an additional form of rent assistance, so we do cap it at 90 days. So if you've come and gotten 90 days worth of rent and similar situation happens, you would not be able to come back for that same household for 90 days. There are a couple cases in which the RMP could reimburse you for the full amount of rent. Those are really going to be limited on the tenant-based side to if it takes an excessive amount of time, more than 60 days, let's say, to turn a unit after an RLA voucher holder leaves, then potentially you could come to the RMP for the full amount of rent for that extra time. And then on the project-based side of things, again, excessive turnover time where you're not getting the payments from the housing authorities. And also if you're holding that unit on the on project-based side of things, if you're holding that unit for a qualified tenant and that takes longer than 60 days, hopefully that doesn't happen. There's enough need out there, but if it did, that would be an eligible expense. Tenant late fees, lease break fees, unpaid utility fees, all of those would be examples of operational losses that you could come to the RMP for. There's a couple more I want to mention, but I want to say these have very kind of depending upon circumstances. The first one would be legal fees. We do not want the RMP to be to incentivize evictions, but we do know that evictions have to happen sometimes. And if that is the case, legal fees could be an eligible item. We're going to ask information from the property owner to find out what steps were taken to avoid eviction, but they could be eligible items. And then relocation expenses, but these are very specifically focused on extreme situations where relocation of a household is necessary to protect the property, physical harm to staff or other tenants at the property. Next slide, please. I'm going to quickly, well, actually, before I move on to what's not eligible, I do want to say that we are expecting and tell landlords that any amounts that we reimburse to them through this process cannot be still charged to the tenant. So if those already were on the tenant's ledger, they need to come off. And similarly, as a disclaimer, we always say to property owners, just because you're getting a reimbursement from us, the tenant is not part of our reimbursement process. So our reimbursement to you is not in any way the tenant kind of admitting culpability for physical damage to their property. Next slide, please. Quickly, what doesn't it cover? I've already kind of hinted at all these things. Again, anything that's normal wear and tear or in turnover instances. If the damage was not caused by the RLA household or a guest of their household, it wouldn't be eligible. If you have no evidence other than the owner saying it was them that damage was done to the common area. And then because we're maxed out at 5 units for those multi-unit claims that I mentioned, if there were more than 5 units, say 7 units were damaged, unfortunately 2 of those would not be eligible for inclusion in a claim. On the operational side of things, you cannot ask for reimbursement for the amount of increases to your insurance premiums. The RMP is not designed to be a replacement for insurance, obviously, but we don't require that you do make an insurance claim in order to access it. But I do want to point out that we have the ability, if an insurance claim is not being submitted, I don't anticipate we'll have to use this much, but to adjust amounts if it's a very large claim and a landlord's choosing not to file a claim. But we also understand that we are all in an environment where insurance costs are skyrocketing. And so I think the RMP will definitely be a resource for certain types of reimbursements to help landlords not have to go through the insurance process and potentially have their premiums increased. Next slide, please. I'm going to quickly cover now what are the limits. I'm sure you're wondering if you haven't read about the RMP thus far. On the tenant-based side of things, it's relatively simple. The maximum is based on a per claim and a per tenancy amount, and that's $5,000 in both those cases. So no single claim will be paid out for more than $5,000 on a tenant-based RLA voucher situation. But the claim doesn't have to be $5,000 all at once. There's no limit to the amount of claims you file. So that could be $2,000 in one claim and then 3 future claims for $1,000 a piece. But once that $5,000 maximum is hit, then there is not going to be any eligibility for more reimbursements during the term of that tenancy. So for the tenant, what that means is if they take their voucher, leave that property and go to a new property, their new landlord will have access to up to $5,000 during the term of that new tenancy. And what that means for property owners is if a tenant leaves and they choose to rent to another tenant with an RLA tenant-based voucher, then they would again have access to up to $5,000 for eligible items during the term of that new tenancy. In those instances for multi-family or multi-unit claims that I mentioned, the maximum for each unit included in the claim would be $5,000. So on the physical damage side of things, in a kind of worst case scenario, big issue, there's the potential for up to $25,000 to be accessed by that property owner. Oh, awesome. Yeah.
What is the maximum term of tenancy and who negotiates that term?
I think that's going to be up to, is there a minimum for Arla?
Generally just what the landlord standard practice is.
The question was whether or not there was a limit to the maximum tenancy.
So is it like 1 year? I think on an earlier slide it said something about a much longer contract term.
Oh, I think that's for project based. For the project basing of the RLA vouchers, that's the contract term that Devin was talking about. But for leases, we just when we talk to the landlords, property owners, we just say what your standard practice is. I mean, ideally, we, would be nice to have a 12-month lease, just for stability. But whatever the landlord standard practice is for non-voucher tenants.
And as it relates to the risk mitigation program, I just want to point out that the maximum amount that's accessible does not reset with a lease renewal. So that's tenancy defined as however long that tenant stays at that property. And at that, I very specifically say at that property because it also doesn't reset if the tenant moves just to a new unit within that same property. We definitely didn't want it to incentivize property owners to shuffle RLA tenant-based voucher holders around at their properties in order to keep accessing a new pot of $5,000. Next slide, please. Can I asked at the beginning if folks were familiar with RLA and how many of you are working with RLA right now. Can I ask how many of you are working with project-based RLA right now? 1, 2, okay. Oh, there's 3, all right. Well, I'll spend a minute on this slide then. I often skip over this because the maximums on the project-based side are more complicated. So for the 3 of you, I'm gonna very high level. If you have questions afterwards, come find me or ask them in the question section in just a minute. The maximums on the project-based side are based on the type of unit. So you'll see up here SROs through 4+ bedrooms. And then the lifetime maximums are for the property, not the unit itself. And so that's designed because we don't expect too many property owners are going to have one tenant-based or project-based RLA unit at their property. If they're entering into that agreement, it's likely going to be for multiple units. So the maximum is going to be based on how many RLA project-based units there are, what type there are, and then a calculation based on this chart that you see. Because we don't have a ton of project-based in here, I think I'll cut it at that. And like I said, ask follow-up questions or come find me afterwards. Next slide, please. So here's my information. Again, as I mentioned before, the HDC webpage for the RLA RMP has the current claim form. It's got FAQs, our policies. We're going to start building it out with flyers, materials that service providers, the wonderful work that Brandon and his organization and all the amazing service providers do. They're a huge part in getting this information out to landlords and property owners. So we'll have materials that can be used, hopefully up on that site soon. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I've got, next slide, please. One last slide with contacts for your counties if you have questions about RLA overall, and then some websites to the counties, RLA and SHS program websites. And again, this presentation will be, a PDF version will be linked to the YouTube presentation up on that Housing Oregon's going to put up at the end. Next slide. But then, do you mind just going back one? So we'll go to questions, but I'll leave this up in case anybody wants to write down any of that information. Any questions? And there's one more mic too. Yes.
I was curious how many project-based units in the Clackamas area were slated for, or what we're hoping for at project end. I was just asking for the YouTube and everyone in the back, how many project-based units are we hoping, or does the program have slotted, I guess, in this year and by the end of the project? Thanks.
So I can say for Washington County, there are a certain number of I guess you could say slots that are already allocated for project base. What that number is right now, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it is a pretty significant number to combine with the tenant-based RLA voucher. But yeah, we have currently we have one project that has tenant-based RLA vouchers already in usage. Sorry, project-based tenant vouchers, project-based vouchers for a property. So those are already actively being used. And then we have already kind of planned out the rollout of the next ones.
Multnomah Multnomah County has about 100, approximately 150, with I think about 100 filled right now. So, and that's around 10 project-based buildings we're working with.
Clackamas County, we're just starting, excuse me, we're just starting the lease up process for a couple, our first 2 developments that are coming online with project-based vouchers. But the reason that we don't have a clear answer of the goal is, to my knowledge, there isn't like a set goal of how many project-based vouchers we're using. That there's also not like a set amount of funding set aside for project-based vouchers. It comes from the same pool of funding for ARLA. So as you know, as more developments come online, or more developers are interested in these vouchers, we can definitely expect more funding to be put towards these project-based vouchers, but it really depends on whether affordable housing developments are interested or are able to come online using these vouchers.
Thanks, Katie.
Yes. Hi, good morning. Mary Rain O'Mara from Central City Concern. We have a building with 30 project-based ARLA, and it's been up and running for 2 years, PSH, 60 units overall. What is the effective date, and is there any ability to go retroactive on claims?
There. Oh, we've got a second one. Yeah, we'll share. We can figure this out. We're adults. Although my kid could figure this out too. Yeah, so the policies of the program say 12 months. And that will be what we utilize going forward. We do recognize that the RMP portion of ARLA got going way later. So up front, we've talked to the counties. We're comfortable with processing claims that go back farther than that, but that won't be the case now that the program's up and running. But yeah, for those situations where you were an early adopter. So thank you.
Hi there, Dana Schultz. I'm with OHCS. I just had a question about the tenant-based ARLA. I think you mentioned that the tenants are coming from coordinated access. So sorry if I missed this, but can you explain the eligibility? Like, is it PSH level folks who are coming from coordinated access, or is it more of a lower need coming from coordinated access for those tenant-based vouchers?
So it is, the eligibility criteria is the households must be chronically homeless, and then also be at or below 30% of the AMI. But I know it's a little bit different because we're VASH, right? Oh, no, never mind. Yes, VASH. In Multnomah, it's a little bit different for VASH, not VASH, veterans who have, income coming in from service-connected disability that may put them above that. So it's a little bit different there.
Yeah, so the eligibility is not the same that HUD uses. So it's Metro put together their own eligibility, and like we mentioned before, there's that 75% of the funding must be spent on population A, which is like experiencing chronic homelessness, has a disability, below 30% of area median income. But 25% can be spent on population B, which could be people that are at risk of homelessness or are chronically homeless but don't meet those other criteria. So most of the funds are being spent on the people with very high needs, although it's not the exact same criteria that HUD uses. And we do, at least in Clackamas County, I believe the other counties, most people are going through the same coordinated entry system. So there's not like a new phone number people have to call, that we're just tapping into the existing systems. In Clackamas County, we have coordinated housing access, which is a single point where anyone can call in a housing crisis and then get referred to whatever program they're eligible for. ARLA is just one of those programs. So the entry system is the same.
Great, thanks. I guess my second question is, and again, sorry if I missed this, who are the case managers? Like it sounds like Centro is one organization that provides case management. Like how does that get connected to the tenant?
So for there's a matching system that we use, HMIS, and so what we'll get is either referrals from them. We did used to have a wait list, but they kind of got rid of that because the wait for housing is just too huge. So we get referrals through the county. They go through what's called a phase one. A phase one basically determines what they qualify for and what program they get referred to. HCMS is the lowest barrier, but it has the income of 30%. And so then you have rapid rehousing, which is middle term, which is 60 to 80%. And then they're coming out with a new one, which is going to be even less, but I won't talk about that because there's still still a lot going on with that. But yeah, so we're connected through that system. And then what happens is we reach out, we have a specific time frame and how many times we can try to connect with them before we have to send that referral back. Generally, sometimes there's not a lot of connection or information about how to connect to the clients. So a lot of times we have to do a lot of tracking down. We're going through our outreach team. We're going through check-in centers, day centers, all of that. So we're trying to do our due diligence before we have to refer them back because they're obviously referred to us for a reason. So.
Heard that, like that the counties have their own group of organizations.
Right. So also each county contracts with a group of service providers to provide the housing navigation, supportive housing, case management. So once people are already housed, often organizations do both so that the participant can stay in. And then, so, like Brendan mentioned, there's often a matching process. So someone doesn't have services, doesn't have a case manager, they need housing. So the county will help match them with a provider that has capacity among those contracted providers. But sometimes, and maybe I think Multnomah County, sometimes people that are already working with providers come and need a voucher. But maybe, do you want to talk more about that?
Sure. In Multnomah County, we work through the coordinated access system also. So there'll be different projects. So like Urban League will have 30 vouchers, or Northwest Pilot Project will have vouchers. So as people come through coordinated access, they'll get matched to kind of an appropriate provider. That's how we're doing it in Multnomah County. And all the providers contract with the joint office for the supportive services. And they also do the coordinated access. So.
Hi, I'm Catherine with Community Partners for Affordable Housing. And one thing, and this isn't just specific to ARLA, but one thing that we are seeing is with the rules on rent increases, there's the exception for people who hold a voucher that landlords don't have to stick to that. This right now it's 10%, right? That 7% plus the, what's it called? Yes, thank you. And so there's been concerns coming up from some of our participants about, people who are hoping at some point to not require the ARLA voucher and kind of move forward in their income attainment, but still concerned that because the rents have increased so much, what we've seen, like one person got a $400 increase for a year because they're a voucher holder, so it's exempt from that rent increase rule. They're worried that if at the point they're above the 50% AMI, they're not going to be able to afford the unit when they no longer have the ARLA voucher, and they'll be priced out of those places, as well as kind of an overall, I'm just raising this as like, as a community, how are we thinking about how voucher, how some of this can contribute to potentially rising rent costs that may be somewhat inflated. So I don't know who can answer that, but.
I think I'll say a little bit about the tenant-based, and maybe I'll let project-based experts speak. But as far as I know, tenant-based voucher holders are still covered by the rent increase protections. So if like at Home Forward, if a landlord requests a rent increase for a tenant-based voucher, we check that it's rent reasonable and for comparable rents, and it cannot be over the limit for the Multnomah County and the state. So I have not heard that before, that they're not protected, but I know there's some things with the LIHTC properties and project-based, so maybe I will pass it to an expert in that area.
You want me?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not.
So for project-based as well, the policy is 2 to 3% rent increase per year, and it also can't exceed rent reasonableness or our 80% AMI rent amount. The situation you described, it actually sounds like it wouldn't meet the policy for either project-based or tenant-based. So maybe you should talk to whoever of us represents your county, and we can try to best assist and figure out what's going on there, because I mean, definitely we don't want that to happen generally.
Aren't you talking about like when household income increases above to where they don't qualify for a voucher anymore? Oh,
So we just actually had a situation in Washington County where somebody did get this increase, and it went through, and the ARLA team did say that this is allowable because of this exception in the rule. So even the notice has a space that has like the rent increase. There's a notice that's, refers back to the ORS or whatever that they mark that this is exempt from this because of the voucher. It being either a voucher holder or something like that. It has like a few categories.
Yeah, so I think what could happen is that the property could be like a tax credit property. And in those instances, yeah, the landlords can go above it because that's just part of the mechanism that they're able to tap into so most likely that was probably the situation.
Okay.
That if you saw a big increase like that, it was because it was a tax credit property. And so they are able to go above like the standard because it's still in their kind of formula, still affordable.
And so if it's just an individual voucher holder at a regular apartment, that's not going to apply.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so a lot of it, when you all kind of see like funky little things like that, it could just be because the type of funding for the property itself that has like different things, different wiggle room that a standard like regular funded property doesn't have.
credit has one too. So we should talk about it. I have a question that I think I know the answer to, but just for the audience, for project-based ARLA, can you get project-based vouchers on existing properties instead of like just brand new developments that are getting new contracts? If you have an existing affordable housing project, can you get project-based ARLA vouchers put on them?
Yes.
Nice. I knew that answer, but I think people need to know that. Oh, and you. I'm cutting through, sorry. Yep.
Hi, Anita from the Housing Development Center. I was just going to ask about contract term, for the project-based vouchers for all of you, how are your developers dealing with the fact that it's a very uncertain term because oftentimes, the perm lender will want to see that contract matching up with their term. So.
Yeah, great question. So the way that we, write the contracts is we make it any extension past the measure sunset date contingent on funding availability. And so typically projects aren't leveraging the project-based ARLA in their underwriting. So it's usually happening post-closing. I think there's only been one instance where that's occurred. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
But I will say, even though HTC doesn't work on the actual ARLA voucher side of things, I know there are very smart people trying to figure out how to address this. And we were just talking about this the other day, and obviously it's not the same situation, but technically project-based vouchers through all the housing authorities are subject to annual appropriations from HUD. So lenders have gotten comfortable knowing that there's some risk there. So maybe we can get them comfortable with the risk involved here too.
Yeah, and just broadly, so this funding is passed by a ballot measure in Metro region, right? And it was a 10-year ballot measure, and there are concerns what might happen if funding doesn't pass. And really the answers that we need voters to reapprove this. It would be really a huge tragedy. We've put together such great programs. We've increased our capacity to serve people. We already have thousands of households receiving this benefit. And when we have the ballot measure come up, we should be at that goal of 5,000 households that have come out of homelessness into housing. And we cannot do that to them to cut off the rent assistance and supportive services. So please, all of you, when the time comes, please be champions of this so that we don't lose this key resource. Yeah.
Sorry, I would just want to say we are a minute past 10:15. And out of respect for the next crew that needs to get up here and set up, I think we're gonna have to cut off questions, but please, if you have more questions, find one of us. Thank you.